Chapter 1: Flames in the Forest. The forest trembled. Towering spruces and pines swayed under the weight of the heat, crackling as if they were living beings. The wind, like a giant blacksmith's bellows, fanned the fire, leaving its victims no chance of escape. Thick clouds of smoke billowed upward, shrouding the sky in a dark veil. The flames surged forward, relentlessly consuming everything in their path. Somewhere within this raging inferno, on the outskirts of the forest, a massive grizzly lifted its head toward the sky. Its black eyes, usually calm and wise, now darted in fear. The fire had already devoured part of its territory, forcing it to flee in search of refuge. The bear could feel the ground beneath its paws growing hotter, while the acrid scent of burning pine needles and the flesh of wild animals filled the air. It had lived here for many years, born in this forest. It had grown up and learned to survive here. The wilderness was its home, but now that home was turning against it. Panic gripped the animal as the thunderous crash of a falling tree echoed through the inferno. The deafening crack was followed by a burst of sparks, and the bear bolted. It didn't know where it was going. The only instinct driving it forward was fear. It couldn't understand why its familiar world had suddenly turned into a blazing nightmare. At that very moment, several miles away from the fire, life in the small town of Wooden carried on as usual. With a population of just a few thousand, the town moved at a slow and steady pace. The main street, paved with red bricks, was lined with small shops, diners, and cafes. Residents Saturday on porches, chatting about their daily lives. No one suspected that trouble was already closing in. Sheriff Ben Carter, a 50-year-old man with a stern gaze and close-cropped silver hair, stood on the porch of the station, looking toward the horizon. He knew that a wildfire was raging somewhere in the distance, but no alarms had been raised yet. Fires were a common occurrence in these parts, especially in the height of summer. However, something inside him told him that this time, things weren't so simple. Just then, the station phone started ringing off the hook. Farmers on the outskirts of town were reporting strange occurrences: broken fences, panicked livestock, massive claw marks on trees. One of them, an old man named Roy Miller, claimed to have seen something in the forest, a monster fleeing from the flames. Ben, I'm telling you, it wasn't just some lost bear wandering into our land. That thing was huge, damn huge. I've seen plenty of bears in my life, but never one like this. And it's scared. When an animal like that is afraid, it becomes dangerous. The sheriff frowned. Bears usually didn't stray this far unless something forced them to. Maybe the old man wasn't exaggerating. If he was right, this could be a serious problem. Meanwhile, the grizzly had reached the first farms. Under the cover of night, it slipped onto one of the ranch properties, breaking through a gate. It didn't need much food, just something to satisfy its hunger. The barn smelled of hay, sweat, and horses, but most of all, it smelled of blood, chickens. The bear tore through a few wooden coops, shredding the birds inside. Their panicked screeches awakened the ranchers, and moments later, a gunshot rang out. The bear roared and recoiled. The bullet hadn't hit it, but the deafening noise scared it even more. It turned and fled, crashing through bushes and fences. There was no thought behind its actions, only fear, pushing it forward. By sunrise, The news had spread across town. Newspapers, local radio stations, and social media buzzed with reports of strange events. Some claimed they had seen a giant beast near the town's outskirts. Others spread rumors of a hell beast that had escaped from the fire to seek revenge on humans. Sheriff Carter knew that speculation would only fuel panic, and he needed to act fast. He called in several rangers to scout the area and reached out to wildlife biologists for advice. If this really was a bear, they would need to either drive it back into the wild or find a way to tranquilize it. But a decision had to be made quickly, because this beast, terrified, massive, and deadly, was already closing in on the town. Chapter 2. The First Victims. The silence of the night was deceiving. Woodhaven carried on with its usual routine, but the alarming news of a beast emerging from the flames was already spreading. Calls to the police increased. Residents reported growls in the darkness, found torn open cages where their pets had once been, and glimpsed the silhouette of a massive creature lurking at the town's edge. Yet, these were just rumors until the first attack happened. At dawn, Farmer Roy Miller headed to his barn. His old shepherd dog, Buck, paced nervously, crawling at the dark corners of the yard. Roy thought it might be coyotes, but as he got closer, he saw that the barn doors were wide open, and inside, chaos reigned. Straw was scattered, feeders were overturned, and in the corner lay the mangled carcass of a cow. Roy frowned, clutching his chest. In the straw, he saw massive clawed footprints. They were so large that he knew immediately this wasn't wolves, coyotes, or even an ordinary bear. This was something much bigger, something that hadn't come here by accident. He rushed back to the house and grabbed his rifle. His fingers trembled as he tried to dial the sheriff's number. The ringing seemed endless until finally, Ben Carter's sleepy voice answered on the other end. "Ben," Roy gasped. "It was here. That damn thing tore my barn apart." Calm down. Are you sure it was a bear?" "A bear? Hell no. This thing was the size of a damn truck. I have to kill it before it comes back. Don't even think about it." "I'm sending my men over right now. Do not go after it alone." But it was too late. Miller was already loading his shotgun as he stepped through the gate. Not far away, young journalist Sophie Clark Saturday in her small office at the local newspaper, scanning the latest reports. She had been one of the first to hear about the strange incidents outside town, and something told her this wasn't just another wildlife sighting. She found Roy Miller's number and called, but no one answered. Then she dialed the sheriff. "Ben, what's going on? People are saying some kind of animal is attacking farms. Is it true?" "Not your business, Sophie," Carter grumbled. "We'll handle it, but if it's dangerous, people need to know. We'll inform them when it's necessary. Stay out of it." But Sophie wasn't one to back down. She grabbed her camera and car keys, determined to drive to Miller's farm. By the time she arrived, the sun was rising, painting the sky in crimson and orange hues. An old sheriff's pickup was parked by the gate, and a small crowd had gathered near the barn. She spotted Ben Carter standing beside another officers. Their faces were tense. "What happened?" Sophie asked as she rushed over. Ben sighed. "Miller is dead." Her heart sank. He went looking for the beast, and he found it." Sophie didn't know what to say. A chill crept under her skin despite the morning heat. Carter looked at her gravely. This isn't just a bear, Sophie. It's scared, it's angry, and it's bigger than any animal I've ever seen. In the distance, through the morning mist, a low, menacing growl echoed from the forest. Chapter 3: The Eyes of the Beast. The forest was eerily silent. The grizzly, covered in soot and dirt, Saturday motionless among the towering trees, cloaked in the shadows of dawn. His thick brown fur was matted with sweat and ash, and his massive chest rose and fell heavily. He hadn't eaten in days. His stomach clenched with hunger, but the fear of fire had been stronger. He couldn't go back. Behind him was a blazing inferno. He had barely escaped, but ahead lay the unknown, the scent of asphalt. Humans, machines, all of it was foreign, but he had no other choice. He rose onto his hind legs, scanning the forest for a path. In the distance, the shapes of buildings emerged boundary of the human world. The grizzly caught their scent: food, smoke, metal, fear. He sensed danger, but also something irresistible: the smell of meat, milk, something edible. Instinct pushed him forward. At that moment, Sheriff Ben Carter Saturday in his office, poring over maps of the area. On the desk before him lay reports from rangers, satellite images of the forest, evacuation route plans. Since the attack on Roy Miller, the situation had spiraled out of control. The townspeople demanded answers, farmers armed themselves, and social media was already buzzing about the monster from the woods. Carter rubbed his temples. He had been sheriff of this town for 20 years and had seen plenty fires, floods, wolf attacks, but never before had he faced a wild animal coming straight into town. He needed a plan, but he didn't have one yet. The station door suddenly burst open, and Sophie Clark stormed in, her brown eyes blazing with determination. "Ben, I need to know what's happening," she demanded. "Sophie, not now. I'm busy. People are panicking. They're arming themselves, posting online. Some are even forming hunting parties. Do you understand what's about to happen? That bear is scared and angry, and if any of these so-called heroes try to kill it, we're going to have more deaths on our hands." Carter exhaled heavily. She was right. People didn't understand that they were dealing with a cornered predator, one that would kill not out of aggression, but out of survival instinct. Bears didn't attack without reason, but if injured or trapped, this one would fight. "What do you suggest?" he finally asked. "I need access to the people who actually know what they're doing. Experts, biologists. Maybe they know how to calm it down, drive it away from town." Carter picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Dr. Reed, this is the sheriff. We have a situation, and we need your help." Meanwhile, the Grizzly had reached the first street of Woodhaven. This was the town's outskirts, where small wooden houses stood with fence yards and front lawns. It was still early, and the streets were mostly empty, but one man saw him. Old Henry Thompson, a lifelong resident of Woodhaven, had stepped onto his porch for a morning smoke when he noticed the massive shadow moving slowly along the houses, his hand frowsy halfway to his mouth, his cigarette slipping into the ashtray. "Oh my God," he whispered. The bear stopped. He could smell the man, his shallow breath, hear the faint beat of his heart. They stood motionless, staring at each other. Thompson made no sudden movements, but the Grizzly suddenly turned and swiped his paw at a trash can, knocking it over. The loud crash echoed through the quiet street. Henry, forgetting all caution, bolted back inside and slammed the door shut. In the same instant, the bear ran in the opposite direction, didn't want a confrontation, but the noise and human panic only reinforced what he already knew. This world was foreign, and he didn't belong in it. By noon, everyone in town knew about the bear. Eyewitnesses uploaded photos to social media. Videos of its massive figure moving among houses racked up thousands of views. The news reached major TV channels, and reporters began arriving in town. Dr. Emily Reed, a wildlife specialist, arrived, and would even later that evening. She wore field gear, a bag slung over her shoulder, and binoculars around her neck. Carter met her outside the station. "Doctor, wait, we've got a serious problem," he said, skipping formalities. "I'm aware, Sheriff. Where is it now?" Last sighting was on the town's edge, heading toward the park. "We need to act fast before people take matters into their own hands. We need to be careful," Emily replied. "If he's hungry and scared, he could turn aggressive at any moment." "That's exactly why I called you," Carter nodded. "We don't have much time." What they didn't know was that at that very moment, just a few blocks away, the bear had already found what he was looking for. The scent of food had led him to a small cafe, where trash bins behind the building overflowed with scraps. The Grizzly rummaged through the garbage, his hunger momentarily sated, until the sound of footsteps interrupted him. A young cook had stepped outside to throw out the trash. He frowned as the massive beast loomed before him. What the?" he exhaled, dropping the bag. The bear turned to look at him. There was no anger in his dark eyes, only fear and hunger. But the cook didn't know that. He spun around and screamed, bolting back into the cafe. "That was a mistake." The sudden noise, the fast movement, it triggered the predator's instincts. The grizzly roared and swiped his paw at the metal dumpster, sending a deafening crash through the air. The scream was heard all over the neighborhood. People rushed outside, some reaching for their phones, others for their guns. The town was just beginning to understand this bear wasn't going to leave on its own. And now, they had to decide how to stop it without turning this day into a bloodbath. Chapter 4. The hunt begins. What even descended into chaos? The news of a bear roaming the town spread instantly, triggering a wave of fear and panic. Residents, armed with hunting rifles and shotguns, patrolled the streets while the police struggled to stop them. Reporters flocked to the town from all over the county, capturing footage of empty streets and massive paw prints. Sheriff Ben Carter Saturday in his office, gripping the phone. "I said no unauthorized hunts," he barked into the receiver. "We need to handle this professionally. If someone wounds it and only enrages it, there will be even more casualties." "Sheriff, this is our town," a voice on the other end shouted back. "You're doing nothing, and that beast is already here. We won't sit on our hands." Carter clenched his jaw and slammed the phone down. He turned to Dr. Emily Reed, who Saturday across from him. "We need to act faster, or this town will tear itself apart." Emily nodded. "The bear is looking for food and a safe place. If we can lure it out of town, we have a chance to avoid bloodshed." "Lure it out? It has an extremely keen sense of smell. We can use bait meat, honey, fish, anything. But we need a place where it can go." Carter thought for a moment. There's an old warehouse on the outskirts, near the forest. If we lure it there, we can shut the gates and buy some time. It's worth a try, Emily agreed, but we have to move quickly. Meanwhile, the bear continued exploring the town. It was no longer afraid of the sounds of cars and streetlights, but in every new alley, it was met with the scent of fear. People locked themselves in their homes. Cars were abandoned on the roads. Occasionally, it heard screams, saw fleeting shadows, felt the ground tremble under hurried footsteps. All of it irritated him. In the town square, he found a fountain. The water was murky, but his thirst won. The grizzly lowered his head and began to drink. Then came the sound of footsteps. At the other end of the square stood a man. He held a rifle in his trembling hands, but his eyes burned with determination. The bear lifted his head. The man took a step forward. "Leave, beast," he whispered. "This isn't your place." The bear growled, his fur bristling. He sensed danger. The man raised his rifle, but before he could aim, the grizzly roared and lunged to the side. A gunshot rang out, the bullet missing and striking a brick wall. The bear disappeared into an alley. The man cursed and reloaded, but the beast was already gone. "He's heading toward the warehouse," Sophie Clark shouted from inside her car. She held up her phone, recording everything. The plan might work. Carter and Emily were already at the warehouse. They had set up crates of fish and meat, opened the gates to give the bear an entry. Now, all they had to do was wait. Soon, a massive figure emerged from the alleys. The grizzly moved slowly, his paws scraping against the asphalt. He smelled food. An instinct pulled him forward. Almost there, Emily whispered. The bear stepped closer, pausing at the entrance. He sniffed the air, then took a step inside. "A little more," Carter murmured. Then, behind them, came the shouts. "There he is! Shoot!" A group of armed men stormed into the alley. One of them raised his rifle and fired. The bullet grazed the bear's shoulder. The grizzly roared in pain and charged, smashing through crates. People screamed and fell. Others fired their guns. Chaos erupted. "Damn it!" Carter yelled. "Fall back!" Wounded and enraged, the bear broke free from the trap and ran blindly through the town. The plan had failed. Emily clenched her fists. Now it definitely won't stop. The grizzly disappeared into the maze of streets, and the town, holding its breath, waited for his next move. Chapter 5: Nature's Wrath. The grizzly charged through the dark streets, leaving bloody tracks behind. The bullet lodged in his shoulder pulsed with pain, but fear and rage drove him forward. He no longer thought about food or shelter. No, the whole world was his enemy. With each second, the city reminded him of the fiery hell they had fled from. On the other side of Waven, people remained hidden in their homes. Some clutched their children close, unable to sleep. Others tensely followed the news. Some stood by their windows, rifles in hand, ready to shoot. The town held its breath, waiting. Sheriff Ben Carter Saturday in his car, holding the radio close to his lips. "Report his last known location," he demanded. A static-filled voice crackled through. "The park by the lake. He's heading toward the residential district. I repeat, the grizzly is moving straight into the city center." Carter cursed. Emily read Saturday beside him, nervously wringing her hands. "We have to stop him before he kills someone else." She whispered. We need a plan. Carter muttered. The usual methods aren't working. This animal is scared and furious. If we keep cornering him, it'll only get worse. Emily thought for a moment, then turned sharply to the sheriff. He's looking for shelter. He fled from fire, and now he's wounded. He needs a place to tend to his injuries. If we give him that, he might stop. Carter shook his head. We can't just let him take refuge in the city. The people won't stand for it. Then we create one artificially, Emily said. If we can lure him to the park and surround him with cars, he might settle there. Then we'll find a way to sedate him. Carter hesitated. It was a risky plan, but he knew they were running out of time. All right, let's try it. Meanwhile, on the edge of the residential district, the Grizzly encountered a new threat. A group of armed volunteers stood in his path, their weapons ready. They frowned as the massive beast emerged into the glow of the streetlights. He's wounded, one man shouted. Let's finish him off. No, wait, another tried to stop him, but it was too late. A gunshot rang out. The bullet struck the bear's side. The grizzly roared so loudly that the hunter's ears rang. Then he charged, plowing through everything in his path. The first hunter didn't have time to react, was struck by the bear's paw and sent flying. The others fired wildly, but the beast was already among them. Screams filled the night. Some tried to run, but the bear wouldn't let them go so easily. He smelled blood, heard the agony of his attackers. In the distance, sirens howled. Carter and his team were racing toward the carnage. By the time the police arrived, the street looked like a battlefield. Several men lay motionless, others writhed and hang. The grizzly stood among them, panting heavily, his fur matted with blood, both his own and that of his victims. He slowly backed away, but it was clear he wouldn't surrender without a fight. Carter jumped out of the car, raising his gun. Stand down, he shouted. The grizzly looked at him. There was no fear in his eyes anymore, only rage. He took a step forward. At that moment, Emily, standing behind Carter, screamed, No, don't shoot, give me a chance. Carter shot her a glance. Are you insane? Just trust me, she shouted and slowly stepped forward, holding a small container of bait. Inside was fresh salmon, laced with a sedative. The grizzly hesitated. He smelled the food, even through the pain and fury. His instincts took over. Emily gently placed the container on the ground and backed away. It's okay, big guy. You don't have to run anymore, she whispered. The bear huffed, watching her, then slowly approached and began to eat. With each bite, his movements grew sluggish, his breathing slowed. Within a minute, he collapsed onto the ground. Carter watched him closely. Did it work? Emily wiped sweat from her forehead and nodded. Yes, he'll be out for a few hours. We have time to move him. Carter exhaled in relief and turned to his team. Call for a helicopter. We're sending him back to the wild. The town held its breath. The nightmare was over. But they all knew this night had changed Woodhaven forever. Chapter 6, Aftermath. The town of Woodhaven was slowly recovering from the events of that night. The square, streets, and alleys still bore the scars of the carnage-cracked pavement, drops of blood on the asphalt, scattered belongings left behind by panicked residents. But most importantly, the bear was gone. Sheriff Ben Carter Saturday, in his office, wiping his face with weary hands. The night had been long, but the work ahead was even longer. He was waiting for news about the bear's transport. Emily re-entered, holding a report in her hands. The helicopter landed in the mountains near the Columbia River, she said. He hasn't woken up yet, but his condition is stable. Carter nodded, looking up. Good. That means he'll have a chance to survive in his environment. But what about the town? People are scared, Emily. They want answers. Answers. She scoffed bitterly. Some will call it an accident. Others will demand hunting patrols. And some will say we need to learn to live alongside nature instead of fighting it. Carter stood up and walked to the window, watching as people cleared the aftermath of the attack. We've pushed too close to the wild, and now we're paying the price, he said. That bear didn't want to kill anyone. He was just trying to survive. Emily nodded thoughtfully. Maybe this will be a lesson. We need to find a way to coexist. Set up warning systems, monitor fires, create barriers but not kill. Carter let out a deep sigh. You think anyone's going to listen to you? Emily shook her head. Not right away, but over time. People will realize that we can't fight nature by destroying it. We have to find balance. Carter Saturday back down and reached for his coffee, only to find it had gone cold. He smiled wearily. All right, Doc. Let's give it a try. Weeks passed. The town repaired the damaged streets, erased the traces of chaos. A memorial plaque was placed in the town square, bearing the names of those who had suffered that night. But the changes run deeper than physical repairs. People became more cautious, more mindful of the world around them. Community meetings were held to discuss safety measures. New laws for forest and wildlife protection were introduced. And though the memory of that night would linger in their hearts for years to come, Woodeden had learned an important lesson. Nature was not the enemy. It simply demanded respect. Emily stood at the edge of town, gazing at the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, in his rightful home, the bear now roamed. Perhaps he had already forgotten the terror he had endured. But the people of Woodhaven hadn't. They would remember. Chapter 7. New Horizons. Several months had passed since that terrifying night. Woodhaven had returned to its usual way of life, but people had become more aware of the nature surrounding their town. New safety regulations, surveillance cameras on the outskirts, and increased monitoring of forested areas had reshaped how the locals perceived the wilderness. Emily Reed continued working with conservation organizations, educating people on how to interact properly with the environment. She became a key figure in discussions about preventing future conflicts between wildlife and humans. Her school lectures drew the attention of both children and parents, and city officials began seriously considering the creation of designated wildlife zones outside the town. Sheriff Bain Carter, who had initially been skeptical of all this, now supported Emily. He frequently attended meetings, helped organize town gatherings, and even proposed forming patrols to monitor wildlife activity. His experience and influence helped shift the opinions of Woodhaven's more conservative residents. But some people still lived in fear. Some demanded that the town be completely fenced off from the forests, insisting that the wild was too dangerous. However, Emily and her supporters stood their ground. Balance between humans and nature was possible. One morning, Emily received a message from scientists tracking the movements of wild animals. They had picked up a signal from the collar placed on that very same bear. He was now deep in the forests and, according to the data, had not approached human settlements. This meant the beast had adapted to his new environment. Emily shared the news with Carter, and they both smiled. It was proof that their efforts had not been in vain. The town continued to change. People were learning to live in harmony with nature, and while fear of the wild still lingered, it was now accompanied by understanding. What Eden was no longer just a town on the edge of the forest. It had become an example of how humans and nature could coexist. And somewhere deep in the woods, the great grizzly moved through the shadows of the trees, no longer feeling threatened. The world had changed, and it had changed with it.